Going back to 2003, when you were trying to break this story, you were doing a profile of Jeffrey for Vanity Fair, and this was going to be a part of your profile.
Well, because during I was pregnant with my sons when I began reporting on Jeffrey Epstein, and the irony of this is that I had a high risk pregnancy, so I wasn't allowed fly, and so I was assigned to write about Jeffrey Epstein, and I was assigned to find out where his money had come from, because for the first time in forever he had appeared in the press. He was very press shy ordinarily, but he there was a little item in page 6 in the New York Post saying that he had flown Bill Clinton on his plane to Africa. So I was assigned to go and find out who was this enigma who lived in this enormous house in New York and where'd the money come from. And the idea actually was that for me it would be a very easy piece because I lived in New York too. And it became a nightmare because Jeffrey Epstein would get on the phone to me every day. He would phone me up pretty much to find out how I was getting on in my reporting. And and he began to say things that, I didn't know what to do with, and the lawyers at Vanity Fair didn't know what to do with. Sort of like, well, if I don't like the direction this story goes in, I'll have a witch doctor place a curse on your unborn children. And that was creepy. And then he would say, and by the way, that's off the record. And then he would say some really stupid things like, I'll make sure your children never get into school in New York, and I'll make sure your husband gets fired from his job, which are not really things you want to hear when you're
No,
pregnant with
no.
twins.
Witch doctor,
Yeah,
no
yeah,
academic
no.
career,
That,
and my
you know,
husband's fired.
and by the way, this is all, off the record. And then what was really that unnerved me, where he very persistently wanting to know which hospital I was going to be giving birth at and who my doctors were. And he went into some graphic um, description for me of what would happen to my hormones as I was giving birth. And I just was like, this conversation has really crossed all um, propriety and normal boundaries. And the lawyers, that is why the lawyers at Vanity Fair said to me, we don't know who we're dealing with here. So I think you better start taping him because we just had no idea what he was capable of. And I didn't tell him about the two farmer sisters until the 11th hour, quite deliberately. I slowly explained to him that I did have reporting about working with the guy I mentioned earlier, Steve Hoffenberg. I was able to go and find depositions he'd given admitting to financial shenanigans, both on Towers Financial and at Bear Stearns, all of which he was indignant about. But it was when I finally got to the subject of the sisters, and one of them made claims really actually, against him and against Ghislaine Maxwell, and one of them had been underage. That was when he went into hyperdrive, and he not only then faxed over these copies of letters, thank you letters, he said had been written by one of them as if this was sort of proof of anything. But he then found a way to actually physically go into the offices of Vanity Fair while the piece was sort of going through the machine, the editing machine and the fact checking machine. And I know this because one of the fact checkers sent me an email saying, you're not going to believe it, but Jeffrey Epstein is actually here in the office and he's
Wow.
sitting in Carter's office. And I was, you know, completely appalled. And I was told that he had somehow bypassed security. And Graydon Carter had showed up for work, and there was Epstein sitting there. And the next thing that I knew was when I actually just read the finals of the piece that the all mention of the sisters had been taken out. And, Graydon said to me, well, he's sensitive about the girls. And I'm like, well, of course he's sensitive about the girls. Um, And yes, I was very, 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 very um, upset about it. And then, the piece came out right after I gave birth, and I was, and my children unfortunately were born at 30 weeks, so they were very premature, and I was absolutely terrified that Jeffrey Epstein would sort of find a way to get inside the hospital in the same way he'd got inside the offices of Vanity Fair. So, one of the reasons I've always wondered who the hell he really was and who, was he part of intelligence? There aren't that many people who could have bypassed security at Condé Nast back then in the middle of Times Square. I think we had a major law firm who we shared an elevator bank with. It would have been very, very difficult to do that. So, how he did that, I don't know. I was reading actually Tina Brown, who's another former great friend of
Mhm.
mine, former colleague. She wrote in her newsletter this week that when she was editing, I think, the Daily Beast, she also found Jeffrey Epstein. She came back from lunch or somewhere, and there he was sitting in her office. I mean, normal people don't behave like this, Megan.
No,
So,
no. I mean, he's
they don't.
obviously looking to intimidate you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And obviously back then, the same system of soft power, soft male power that we were talking about earlier worked very effectively for him because the sisters were cut from the piece.
Oh, have you ever talked to Graydon Carter about, and I know editors make these
Yeah.
decisions and so on, but with the benefit of hindsight, how he
Yes, no,
feels
I
about
mean
that decision?
yeah, no. So Graydon Carter, rather, predictably, came out and just, you know, made all sorts of allegations about my reporting and, how I'm a terrible journalist. But the problem with that argument is that I then worked at Vanity Fair and wrote a large number of their significant pieces for a further
Right,
decade
right.
or more. So I can't have been that terrible a reporter.
Wow. God, that's so annoying. I mean, you had him. You had him.